Who did that? Was that John? John Pinar, Duca Financial. That's why we have you here, to cheer.
It wasn't me.
Oh, boy. Heckler in the back. I see you. We'll ask you a lot of questions. AV team, have I got my perfect Bollywood look on? We're all good to go?
Good to go.
Okay, AV team on this side. I'll smile. Don't worry. Like I'm modeling for toothpaste. Don't worry. I'm here. I got this. We good to begin? Fantastic. Well, good morning, good afternoon. I'll also have to say good evening because some people might be watching online and they'll also end up hearing from you fine gentlemen on demand as well. So from wherever you're watching, whether live or on demand, welcome to the CISO Forum. And we're at the final few sessions and I thank you all for joining us. Before I begin, two very, very quick little notes that I like to do before I begin any session. Firstly, a shout out to all of the volunteers and the AV team at the back that's been doing a fantastic job. They're doing an amazing job throughout the last 2 days. Being an advisor to this conference, I also know that they've been here since Saturday. Hats off to all of you. Thank you for treating us very well, but also putting together a good show. Secondly, very quickly, given that this conference is going online and is also in person, I want to recognize that we are on Indigenous territory, but also the online space also constitutes Indigenous territory as all of our cables run across the land, seas, and skies that are within Indigenous locations. Today's topic looks at the rising tide of cloud-enabled malware. And before I dive into this discussion, two very important points on the basis of which we will begin. I'll start off with some introductions, and then we'll dive into some questions that I think we went through, but we will figure it out and build the plane as we fly it. If you take a moment and you read the CrowdStrike cloud threat report from 2023, there's an interesting stat there. It says 36% of most cloud-related breaches and incidents happen because of default misconfigurations. And these have escalated because of the sheer computing power within cloud. I encourage all of you to take the time to go to the CrowdStrike website and download some of their reports. You'll find them very, very useful. The 2024 report in particular, I think, will be one that you want to definitely read. And then if you take the Netskope perspective as well, there's a bunch of reports on their websites from their threat intelligence labs, if I'm getting that correct, and they talk about the increasing use and dependency on cloud, talking to the effect of almost every user now within enterprise has about 19 different apps that they're using. And that is expected to grow considerably over the next few quarters. So there's a lot to dive into when we talk about cloud-enabled malware and how bad actors are utilizing the cloud space to push their activities further. With that, my name is Ali Hirji. I lead cybersecurity for the Youth Employment Services. I also teach. Yes, as I've always said, there is a brain somewhere inside of me, and I do teach at a variety of different institutions, and I'm also finishing my PhDs at York University. You know what they say, those who can do teach. So the people who actually can do cybersecurity are here, so I'm going to be directing my questions towards them. Firstly, to my left, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, but also why is this topic of interest to you?
Thanks, Ali. So my name is Brodofske. My title is the Senior Manager of Infrastructure and Security for the town of Whitby, which for those of you that don't know is a small municipality about 45 minutes down the 407 from here. And so what's important to me about cybersecurity is I've worked in the municipal space now for over 15 years, and I see every day the impact that municipal services have to the residents and people that live there. And just knowing the kind of damage that could be done with a devastating attack to municipality, as we've seen across Ontario and across Canada and the world. I have a connection to what I do, to the people I serve, and I want to do what I can to help protect them from these issues.
Rob, it's always a pleasure. This is our third session together over the last year, and it's been a consistent pleasure. I'm looking forward to hear from you. As Rob said, the town of Whitby, you come for the great internet, you stay because you can't find your car after all of the parties that they have in Whitby. I'm from Oshawa, but friendly competition there. Thank you, Rob, and it's always a pleasure. Please go ahead and introduce yourself, and why is this topic important to you?
Sure. So Stephane Asselin, I'm actually the country manager for the engineering team for CrowdStrike. I've been at CrowdStrike for a bit over 4 years. And I guess for me, what's important and why it's important, has been doing this for a lot of years. I had a pen test company before there was internet that was readily available, so I used to carry my iMac on my shoulder to go to locations actually do this. So what I'm looking for me and why this is important is I need to find, I had the passion back then, I still have it today, but I'm looking for the next person. I'm looking for that next generation to have the passion, right? Because it's a hard battle. It's a day-to-day battle that those people need to do. And if you're not passionate, if you're just doing it as a 9-to-5 job, you're not going to last super long in a cybersec space, right? So I'm looking to help out. I'm teaching as well. I used to be a CH instructor back then, and I'm giving back to the community, to the colleges I'm in Ottawa. So I'm trying to help out, but I'm trying to find that next generation, get that passion started to make sure that we have some good follow-ups for the future, right?
Thanks, Stephane. To teach us to learn, as they say, and thank you for a very important point as well, as cybersecurity being a lifestyle. And this is something that we're going to be coming back to, especially in the closing keynotes and then the cyber meetup. Stephane, our first session together, I'm looking forward to it. Please go ahead, same question.
Thank you. My name is Ben Shelston. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering for Netskope here in Canada. So Netskope, you may know, is a SASE company, a SASE provider, but what's relevant to us today in the conversation is that we do a bunch of research, as you quoted, on how the cloud is used to obscure, hide, deliver malware, and of course we provide solutions for that. So I'm excited to talk about some things that we should be aware of and potential solutions. Thank you.
Fantastic, looking forward to it. And I do recommend everyone, firstly CrowdStrike and Netskope, thank you for sponsoring this session and having us here. I do recommend to everyone and the AV team on the live chat, if you can post links to those reports as well, it's accessible from their sites. Very, very useful. We use them a lot at our workplace and use them a lot when teaching as well. So thank you for that. And to Rob the second on the panel, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
So I just want to say thanks for CyberX for having this session. Hope it's very informative to the audience. My name is Rob Knoblauch. I'm a financial services type of CISO, responsible for the implementation, operations, incident management, everything you can imagine. From a CISO perspective for companies like Scotiabank, Tangerine Bank, Bank of Montreal, and the Toronto Stock Exchange. I have a lot of history in dealing with cloud-enabled malware.
Fantastic, in keeping our monies or lack thereof safe. Thank you for everything that you've done and will continue to do in the fintech sector. Now, I have nothing to add to this topic. It's not because I'm being lazy. I'm kind of on energy saving mode. I also have the cyber meetup to come up. But if you have questions as they come up, raise your hand. I am trying to monitor Cyber Exchange as well. So if I get any tweets or anything on Cyber Exchange, I'll bring them up as we go along. But of course, if you have questions, feel free to just raise your hand and you can shout it out. I'll repeat it for the AV and we'll see where the conversation goes. Fair enough? I want to start with you first. The first thing that I want our audience to understand is, what are the motivations right now that are driving some of the actors that we're seeing who are utilizing cloud infrastructure to launch their attacks? What's driving this? What's the motivators like? What's 2023 shown you thus far?
So great question. So I guess the first thing regarding, I want to go back to the Global Threat Report. Our 2024 Threat Report is coming out in a couple of days, right? So definitely, it'll be a free report. Definitely want you guys to go look at that. Regarding motivations, and this is something I'm going to steal from Adam Myers, who's our worldwide head of Intel. He does a free podcast, because everybody does one. And what he was talking about was the fact that the landscape has changed tremendously in the last 12 to 18 months, where if you just go back at the end of 2022, the bad actors were most likely attacking cloud miners, right? Like miners were easy targets. They were actually just focusing on that. But within the last 18 months, that motivation has changed. And because of the footprint that keeps expanding, those bad actors are targeting misconfigurations, right? This is the biggest step. In a lot of cases, cloud solutions will be secure by default, but there's a lot of misconfigurations. And if you talk to organizations that are doing multi-cloud, keeping that expertise, getting that expertise from all the different clouds is not always an easy thing to do. And I'm sure I see heads nodding here. I'm sure it's a hard thing to keep in mind. So that motivation is being able to hit the outside door, being at the front gates, and not triggering any internal tools or alarms that they have. So those cloud actors are increasing. In the GTR from last year, we had an increase in 285% of the cloud threat actors that we tracked. Right? We track over 200 groups of threat actors worldwide, 24/7. We have teams dedicated to that. But that increase was, I guess, very eye-opening to us. And the cloud exploitations, all the stuff that they're actually trying to get to the organization's soft spot, which is going to be in a lot of cases, the people, right? We saw sadly, a very huge successful smishing campaign, right? It's phishing through SMS that happened in October and November last year from a nation-state China group, where they were able to have a high percentage. And a high percentage in that space is going to be a 2 to 3% success rate. So keep that in mind. Like, they're attacking people. They're asking for password reset of Azure AD credentials. They're not hitting your internal tools. They're not hitting all the solutions you've put in place. They're staying outside. So that motivation and the hit ratio and the bigger success that we're getting was one thing that we've been seeing as a huge change last year.
I want to work with the word motivation. And Rob, I want to bring you into the conversation because with your background in the fintech sector, and this was a question actually from the advisory board when we had our multiple meetings, we had talked about this, is how do the motivations differ between, it's a slightly more macro question, how do the motivations differ between state-sponsored actors and those that are just motivated by financial gain? Can you provide a little bit of perspective there?
Sure. So you have different classes of threat actors, and I'm very familiar with the kind of criminal organization crime ones, and that can change into state-sponsored. For instance, if you look at one of the most notorious hacking groups, the Lazarus Group, based out of North Korea, their early claim to fame is breaking into SWIFT networks and wire transfer money. So that's like in the multi-millions and billions dollar type of range. From a cloud-enabled malware, what we're seeing more is the garden variety. So things like, and it's been old now, so 2016, for instance, we saw the Dridex malware first hit the scene. Ospumen is kind of a more recent one out of Brazil. And again, what they're using is kind of S3 buckets to drop that second payload, and then using Google Docs to send that C2 configuration, because it's a lot easier to set up an anonymous kind of cloud-enabled server to control a botnet or malware, as opposed to setting up your own server in your own data center on your own points of presence. So we're definitely seeing a massive trend of cloud-enabled malware since around 2016 by threat actors motivated for financial gain when it comes to banking Trojans and things like that. And there's a number of banking Trojans really based on cloud C2 systems.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely, please.
So to add to that, so now that malware and C2 is being hosted in CSPs and SaaS services, it used to be that you'd have bad IPs you can block, right? They're risky IPs, you block them. The challenge now is this stuff is living in a trusted SaaS service. You can't block S3.
You can't block all of Akamai or all
You can't, you can't block CDN's S3. You can't block Microsoft.
Good point.
So our research is showing that something like 30% of malware is coming from SaaS services. Of that 30%, somewhere in the high 60% number of that malware is coming from OneDrive. And the challenge is that OneDrive is the same URL used to access your real OneDrive. So at a network level, at a firewall, you can't put a block on those IPs or those URLs because they're the same ones. Not only do you not block them, you explicitly trust them. And what happened during COVID is to handle the VPN capacity issues, you bypass that traffic from VPN. So you're kind of blind on-prem, and you're fully blind when you're working remote. So this is the biggest shift we've seen, and this is what Netskope helps people with, is that this malware is in trusted services that you are explicitly allowing and bypassing.
A very, very powerful way of explaining the concept of eyes wide shut, which Chris Roberts talked about yesterday. Please.
Yeah, and if I may add on the nation-state side, I guess when we're trying to differentiate both the nation-state, as we see from an Intel standpoint, they're playing the long game, right? They're playing a chess game. They're going to be there. They'll be slow and steady until they make the big bang. We were called into a company on the West Coast last year where we were able to root cause a bad actor that came from one of the 4 countries I can't name, but they were there in the environment for over 200 days before they detonated anything. They were just gathering data, gathering IP, getting their information together. It took them that long to establish lateral movement. They were slow and quiet, but they were there for a long time. And that's one of the big differences we see as well, right? The financially motivated one are going to come in as the big bang. It's going to be a SWAT team approach. They're going to try to crash everything. The nation state, they're there for the long run. They're going to try to get IP or cripple the environment.
I'm going to come back to this concept of nation states, and again, I'm going to advise all of you, if you get the chance, there's a lot of, for example, I think it's Cosmic Bear and a couple of other groups that have been studied by both CrowdStrike and Netskope. Highly recommend reading on it. Provides a lot of perspective. We'll come back to these nation state sponsored attacks, especially when you look at the Conti form of attack. So we'll come back to that very shortly. But town of Whitby, you've just heard a lot of interesting things about the nature of cloud, how it's being attacked, eyes wide shut. I got to come down to you because you're in this middle ground sort of where there's the citizens' data, there's also some financial data, there's other services as well. How have you been dealing with this rise in cloud-driven activity, malware-related activity, and what are some changes that you've seen within the town services?
So yeah, we don't necessarily deal with the biggest state actors day to day, but we are usually a target for the financially motivated. Our financial services teams are constantly the targets of spear phishing. There's some business email compromise where people are trying to change vendors, payment information. And what we're doing is a lot of kind of what everybody else is doing, what we're talking about here, leveraging tools like inline tools like CASBs. What I've been focusing on a lot lately, and I've actually heard it in every session I've been to here the past 2 days, is focusing on my identities, the access management, and more specifically the misconfigurations. The one that's high on my radar right now, we use Active Directory or Entra AD or Azure AD, depending on what you want to call it. But identifying the risks and the misconfigurations within Active Directory and Azure Active Directory has been a big priority for me because, like you said, we leverage the threat feeds and block by IP addresses, but now if 30% of them are in the cloud, well, that strategy's not working anymore. And we know it's not if, but when. So I've got to build up my resiliency to be able to deal with this and recover quicker in the eventuality that it does happen. I hope it does not. So that's where I'm focusing my efforts a lot these days, is on the identity, the people aspect of it, because we're also telling the story to the rest of our organization to let them know how it affects them, how they can help us, building the relationships with people. So it's kind of a multi-pronged strategy that we're taking.
I think the shared services model also, for those of you that had the chance to watch, I think it was the first session after the keynote this morning, the shared services model around how municipalities are sharing intelligence and services is also something interesting to look into in terms of dealing with cloud-driven attacks. So thank you for that. Go ahead.
I just want to add to that thought. Whitby's in the Durham region, and we actually have a group. There's about 8 municipalities within Durham region, and we've also expanded that to our libraries. And we bring in all the security-minded people from those teams once a month, and we get together, we share information. Even this morning, I've got emails from that group letting me know about the latest cloud attack that they're seeing, right? So if something happens in one municipality, we're usually sharing that information with the rest of them. Here's what we saw, here's what we know.
I see Northumberland County in the crowd. Are you part of this group as well? Used to be. It feels left out now. Come on, bring your buddy back from Ajax.
I learned that they have their own group in the East End, and we're gonna try to link them together.
All right, fine. Well, make sure that these fine gentlemen are involved in it as well. They have a lot to share about that. Well, thank you for that, Rob. I'm going to catch the 407 from Whitby and go back to Rob, because this was actually, I got this question twice now. I have a couple of folks that are watching online and they've WhatsApped it to me. So it's a question again on Conti. Okay. And the question, and it was something we discussed as well, it's more specifically about, if we look at the TTPs of Conti specifically, what's unique about how they approached their attacks and how they brought an entire country down to its knees? Can you provide some perspective on their TTPs specifically?
You're talking about Costa Rica?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for those of you in the audience who are not familiar with the story, Conti is one of the most prolific, in my opinion, Latin American hacker groups out there. There's other big ones like the Evil Corp and Revil and out of Russia and China, but in particular, Conti has a lot of love for Latin America. In particular, Costa Rica, what they did is, I think it started with a phishing email. You guys may know better than this one in terms of Conti. But basically, MSI package, phishing email, exploiting vulnerabilities, and the next thing you know, the whole country declared a state of emergency because none of their computers worked. So healthcare, passports, a lot of databases. Now, then Conti moved over to Peru and broke into the RENIAC database. And the RENIAC database is basically like think about a database containing your social insurance number. In Peru, it's called a RUI. Your address, your age, but also really fun things like how much your income was last year. So from a hacker's perspective, this is a beautiful database to have. Now you can target all the high net worth citizens in a country and send out phishing emails, identity theft type of emails. So Conti has been very prolific over the last kind of, I'd say, 3-4 years. And a lot of it's the basic hygiene, and a lot of companies can do things to protect themselves against cloud-enabled malware. You're very right, like blocking legit traffic, legit platforms is extremely important. So you're playing whack-a-mole. And this whack-a-mole is very dynamic. So things like network anomaly traffic detection, CASBs, of course. Also, if you can allow list sensitive users to only go to certain places on the internet, if you don't need internet access, perhaps you shouldn't have it. Or just be able to go to this one place or another place. Looking how you're doing data. So HTTPS puts. And if you're seeing a lot of data being exfiltrated as a different pattern, maybe something's weird in your organization as well. What we're also finding is that kind of initial infection used to be like payloads of malware from the cloud. Now we're seeing is living off the LAN techniques coming from the cloud. So AnyDesk would be a great example of something that what Evil 3.0, Lockbit 3.0 was using, and it basically downloaded from the SaaS version of AnyDesk, a copy of AnyDesk to move laterally across the organization and bypass things like traditional antivirus-based signature detection. So Conti, in my opinion, along with Revil, are pretty much the very advanced type of groups out there doing like really cool, innovative, as hackers' language goes, innovative stuff with ransomware and malware. And the way it's working is a lot of other groups are kind of adopting those same techniques and buying them off of them and replicating them.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, if I may add, so our Overwatch team, our Intel team, has been tracking that group for over 5 years now, and that group was very successful with the Conti group. But you know that those organizations in the dark web, deep web, they're pretty ruthless, right? So when the invasion of Ukraine started, some of the people in that group actually started to publicly say that they were endorsing it. And a few days later, within a couple of days, some of the people actually had some of their own information leaked to DLS sites, to dark web forums and all that. So a lot of people within that group did not feel the same way. They're all part of the same entity, if you call it. We call them Wizard Spider, but it's the same group. And they actually offloaded and had spun off into new entities. One of them being Royal Spider. So you know them as, the tool itself is called Royal Raz. It's just an evolution of Conti, right? It's the same source code, the same thing, where they actually just evolve into a different group. And with Black Basta is Wandering Spider, which we also track, right? So, you know, the left hand not talking to the right hand and taking a stance regarding something politic. A lot of those guys within the same organization say, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're just going to focus on the threat itself and exploiting it for money. So a huge evolution within the last couple of years.
If I can bring that to you, and for all of you that are listening, there's it's a lot of detail that we've gone through, but in security, paranoia is a bit of a virtue. So yes, I am going to remind you to consistently go to those reports because there's a lot in there for you. If I can bring you back into the conversation, we had a bit of a discussion on ransomware as a service as well. And we've all quite familiar since over the last 2 years, the whole concept, bad actors are not necessarily, they may be unemployed, but they're certainly not unpaid. So there's a lot of revenue that's been generated from this. How has the evolution of ransomware as a service also impacted the amount of activity we're seeing, malicious activity we're seeing driven by cloud environments?
Well, I'll actually piggyback off something Rob mentioned earlier about one of the best things you can do from hygiene is just restricting what people can access. If you don't need access, block it. And that dovetails, I think, into a bit of the financial services stuff, is that the banks and financial services, because of people like regulatory bodies like OFSI, have taken a very secure approach where generally you can't access what you don't need. And that's worked out well for them. But the challenge they've run into now is they want to adopt cloud, and suddenly now, like one of the biggest banks in Canada doesn't use Office 365 yet, right? Because they don't want to take on the risks that come with the cloud, and they're very well aware of all the stuff we're talking about of cloud-enabled malware. But eventually, you're being forced to adopt things. Yep. So that mentality of blocking what you don't need now goes out the window. Microsoft is end of life all their on-prem stuff. You have no choice but to go to the cloud. The federal government, the big banks are doing it. So people are looking for new approaches, and I guess the banks are driving this, is how do I use these cloud services without accepting all the risks that we've talked about here? Right? And I'll give us a shameless plug in Netskope, and one of the things that we're able to help with is differentiating not just the S3 is a trusted service or Microsoft is a trusted service, but slicing and dicing that a bit more to find out that, hey, this OneDrive HTTP put that we're seeing is destined for Bank A's Office 365 versus Conti Group's Office 365. Okay. And that's really the next level of evolution of detection, is not trusting Microsoft, but then verifying that HTTP put or get, which might be C2 or download from malware, is going to the right Microsoft 365. And that's really the only solution. You can't just trust all these services.
Very powerful. John, this is a good example. John Bernard from Duca Financial on the board. The whole concept of don't trust but verify comes alive with these conversations. Rob, before I come back to you, I do have one question that came in, was WhatsApp to me. Gaurav, was that you? Yeah. Yes. So this question, I'll just read it out. Gaurav, you're with Meta World X, right? Perfect. So he sent me a question. I just want to read it out because I think it's timely, and then Rob, maybe you can jump into it because you alluded to it slightly. So the question is, I'll read it verbatim. Let me know if I've got this correct. Is there any set of instructions or guidelines that can be taken into a consideration while developing a secure cloud product today? If you want to try.
Define product. What are we building?
What do you mean by a product?
Any of the development that we are doing on cloud, and we are having some services that we are providing on cloud. So for that, if there are any guidelines that we can follow, so that a ransomware or any malware attack can be prohibited in advance.
I don't know of any guidelines, and Stephane, I'll let you step in a second, but I'll say that from what I've seen with my customers is that there's a team that runs data centers and there's cybersecurity, and when they develop like a SaaS service, and I won't name and shame certain companies, that's a DevOps team that has a completely different DNA and no security background that builds and hosts that environment. And controls that exist on-prem are non-existent in the cloud. So think of, they may have like IPS and SSL inspection and firewalls and all sorts of stuff on-prem. In the cloud, it's just an EC2 container behind a security group. And and nothing else is followed from a standard perspective. So I always tell customers, like, don't let the DevOps people just run wild. Yeah. Like, a lot of the big banks are doing this. They just do their own thing and don't follow any security standards. So I don't know of like a guide to follow, but a good place to start is to go back to the corporate security folks and say, what do you do on-prem? Maybe you won't use the same tools, but what controls do you have in place? What are you trying to achieve, and can we replicate that in the cloud? I'm not seeing that today.
Yeah. I guess what I'd like to add, though, is when you're looking at a CNAP, right, a Cloud Native Application Platform, you want to make sure that you actually understand your exposure, right, your external attack surface. What do you have? What actually is being in that environment? And in a lot of cases, you will discover if you're talking to people, either us or some other people, right. There's a lot of stuff that you have out there that's externally facing, or at least have a footprint there that you don't know about. So I guess the first thing is obtain visibility, right? That would be the guidance for us. Is we've went to a lot of big organizations where they didn't have that visibility, that thought that they had a good handle on it, and when we actually started to look at the external attack surface, it was like, oh my God, like I didn't know I had all of these. Because you're gonna have branch office, remote offices, whatever the case may be, and people might spin up things that are not, secure by default. So I think one of the big first steps is to make sure you have full visibility, full context into what is externally accessible, what is externally facing.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Gaurav. And again, keep the questions coming. I am trying to monitor as best as I can. Rob, I'm going to come back to you, and then we'll come back to the fintech sector and a little bit of the state-sponsored attacks. I know we've got about 10-ish more minutes. Rob, from your perspective, working within the municipalities and seeing the evolution of the cloud, are the types of attacks that you're seeing within the cloud different from other industries or sectors, or are you seeing some parallels there as well?
I think I'm seeing a lot of parallels there generally with what everybody else is seeing. There's a lot of sort of drive-by attempts that everybody sees that we're all susceptible to. We get a lot more targeted types of phishing campaigns, or even spear phishing against our senior leadership teams or members of council for particular issues that might be going on within the region that are targeted towards that topic that they'll try and take advantage of. Yep. A lot of the times we're also, we're all kind of in this boat, bystanders of other attacks. So, there's been DDoS attacks against Microsoft lately, yep. Which really, for the most part, we can't do nothing about, but we find ourselves a victim to that as well. Yep. Perhaps by these large-scale cloud attacks we're not the intended victim, but we're just an innocent bystander in the way. So
fair enough. We'll work with that towards the end. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. Rob, back to you. A question that came back to me is that you referenced living off the land attacks. Mm-hmm. And can you expand a little bit on that? And what do you see both in the fintech sector and going forward into 2024?
So I think CrowdStrike touched on it a little bit when it comes to inventory and asset management and understanding external inventory management, especially more so with elastic and dynamic environments such as the cloud. I don't have to physically buy hardware and set it up. It takes a long time from a change management perspective as opposed to cloud. So what we find, and actually in the case recently with Microsoft, things like UAT environments being compromised and then hackers moving laterally using basic tools such as, net use, SMB shares, RDP sessions, not things like Mimikatz anymore, or sort of the more tools that are traditionally caught by tools like EDR and antivirus, but more of like system native, system utility type of tools, administrative tools that basically leverage identity and access management compromises and manage and use that privilege management, which makes things like PAM even much more important. Now, that's kind of from a malware perspective. What we didn't also talk about is just how cloud computing is used for DDoS attacks and credential stuffing attacks and things like that. And I know Canada started dealing with this probably around 2015, mid-2010s, when RBC and TD started seeing some significant DDoS attacks, along with a lot of another number of U.S. banks. And that's where we first started seeing cloud infrastructure being used for botnets, being used for malicious purposes. And I thought that was really interesting because before then it was just malware installed on a whole bunch of people's computers or using their ISPs to generate that traffic. Now we're seeing Amazon coming into the party and Google coming into the party and hackers taking advantage of compute resources through compromise and turning that into a weaponized infrastructure. We're going to see more of that. And that topic about blocking dynamically is going to be even harder with AI. But similar to cloud being used for good and evil, I think we're going to be using AI for good and evil to solve things like cloud attacks. So it's going to be really interesting next 5 years, to be quite honest.
A very powerful mic drop moment from you, Rob. I'm going to ask you to pass the mic in because we're a little short on time. Who would have thunk it would have gone this fast? But if I can ask you, going into 2024, it wouldn't be a session with me if I didn't throw in a curveball. Based on what Rob just said, do you agree? And what do you see as the pattern of cloud-enabled attacks going into 2024?
They're continuing, right? So I mentioned, obviously, during COVID, everyone started bypassing. So the reason they choose to hide in the cloud, just to make it more obvious what I said earlier, is because they know people aren't looking, right? It's free compute, it's a free place to hide, but they specifically do it because they know you're not looking. I'll give you an example of an attack that we see frequently, is that someone will spin up a test instance of Microsoft 365. They'll create an Office 365 login page, they'll put it in OneDrive folder, and they'll go in OneDrive and hit share with, and they'll put in, let's say, Stephane, your email address. If you're a Microsoft shop, you get an email from Microsoft, do not reply at Microsoft.com to say, someone has shared a link with you.
Can't tell, been through
and
it.
You click on it, it opens up a login page. That's expected. I log in, I put in my credentials, I've been phished, right? So this happens from an external threat perspective, but also insider threat. These same gaps in which I'm bypassing and trusting, an insider can also then open another tab, go to different Office 365, different Google Drive, and exfiltrate all their company data. So this issue of, crosses many different responsibilities. It's not just threat detection, but just this trusting of SaaS services is very problematic.
Very powerful that you brought up insider threats because we had a couple of questions to that as well. But for those of you that have those questions, please feel free to ask when you meet any of these individuals throughout the conference. Closing comments from your end.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. I guess what I'd like to make sure that everybody here takes away, because you actually mentioned it, is know the critical identities within your environment. Know what they're doing and why they're doing it, at what time, understanding the context, right? The bad actors, the threat actors are not going to slow down. They're going to focus on harvesting credentials. They're going to look for unsecure APIs. Maybe there's some dormant information there that they can still get in without actually hitting your front door. That's what they're going to focus on. So, the challenge with verifying is key. Make sure that your critical identities are being used within your environment, your admin, your Google Cloud, whatever the case may be. Make sure that you can actually know that the access they're doing it for the right reason, under the right context, under the right time.
Rob, given all these attacks, time to migrate to your private island in the Bahamas?
Yeah, I'm thinking so.
Fair enough. Any closing comments from you, Captain?
My closing comment would be, you don't have to necessarily spend a dime to improve your security. You can make sure you're get good at the easy stuff, the basics. Force the attackers up the pyramid of pain to the top. Just make it harder for them. They need to spend more time, more money, more resources, and perhaps they'll move on.
Very well said. And I'm reminded of something that my mentor during my early days studying in university told me, that if you want to solve your cybersecurity problems through technology alone, you don't understand your problems, and you definitely don't understand technology. Thank you, CrowdStrike and Netskope, for coming together as people to bring this session together. Thank you, Rob, and Rob II for this time round, for joining this wonderful session. I learned a lot. Time was short, but I think we did a fairly good job. Thank you, everybody, for watching online, and thank you, everybody, for joining us.